Football might be over until September, but as Josh Pate always says, we don't mutter the word off-season around here at the Raw Prospect Podcast. Welcome back to the show, ladies and gentlemen. I'm your host, Michael Ween, joined, as always, by my fantastic co-host, Mr. Emmy Nixon, here recording on Wednesday, February 19th, the year of our Lord, 2025. Hopefully everybody is having a fantastic month and a fantastic week. On tonight's show, Emmy and I will reveal our top 5 big boards for both the Carolina Panthers and the Chicago Bears. And during the second half of today's show, we will do abbreviated versions of Gut Check over topics such as the NFL Draft, Texas Longhorns football, and a bunch of other things related to the NFL. Please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel and go check us out on Patreon. We also can be found wherever you listen to your podcasts. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you like to consume your sports content. So, with all that being said, we won't waste too much time here today. We'll jump right into the football content. But before we do it, Emmy Nixon, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, man. It's been a very chilly week here in Austin, Texas. So it's been a lot of staying indoors and just staying cozy inside.
Cold front has come in here to Houston today, and it is freezing outside. I was just actually across the street at this burger place right across the street, and just literally walking here across the street, I'm freezing cold. Just outside for like less than 5 minutes. It's insanity here. But hopefully this is kind of the last of the freezing cold temperatures in Texas. And we start to warm up as we get closer to springtime. But let's go ahead and jump right into our big boards for today. We chose 2 teams in the NFC, both of which are picking in the top 10. Emmy Nixon has the Chicago Bears, who, if you aren't familiar with the draft order, are picking at number 10. And I have selected the Carolina Panthers, who are 2 spots ahead of the Chicago Bears at number 8. Again, if you aren't familiar with the draft order, and that's okay. You have 3 months to get familiar with it. So let's just go ahead and jump right in. We can do it like kind of we did last time. Let's go top to bottom here. So I'll let you start us off.
Yeah, well, firstly for the Bears, I think the Bears can maximize the offseason by looking to add edge help and free agency first and foremost, and getting that out of the way so that in the draft they can focus on getting weapons and talent to go alongside Caleb Williams that will grow and mature along with Caleb. In that offensive unit. I think that's the best way to do it. You look at this edge rush class of free agents, you got guys like Hassan Reddick, DeMarcus Lawrence, Josh Sweat, Chase Young, and then even bringing a guy like Khalil Mack back into the fold could be an option as well. And then interior offensive line in free agency, you got to address either center or right guard. You can't have both not filled going into the draft. You got to address one. In my opinion, center would probably be the better option. You got guys like Ryan Kelly and Austin Corbett from the Panthers hitting free agency. Even a younger option like Josh Myers as well from the Packers hitting free agency as well. So pairing a veteran center with Caleb Williams could be a really good thing to add for this Bears team. Kind of a guy that can see and help Caleb with the pass protections, work with him on that part of the game. But to get into my big board, at number 1, I've got Kelvin Banks Jr. This pick would give an immediate answer at right guard, and this past year they had a hodgepodge of guys. Day 1 starter Nate Davis struggled and got benched mid-season. They put in Matt Pryor to replace him, who's 30 years old and formerly a tackle, but he did a decent job. He's hitting free agency as well. So the right guard position is probably the most obvious need for this Bears team if they address center, of course. So that's my number one. Number two, I've got Tyler Warren, tight end out of Penn State. So I look at this draft, like I said before, as you got to pair weapons and offensive line talent and just any offensive talent at all. You got to put as much of it as possible with Caleb Williams so that you can maximize what Ben Johnson can give you as a head coach. That's his calling card, his play calling ability and ability to get the most out of his offensive talent. You got to give him that talent. So Tyler Warren, you plug him in. I think he has the potential to be a just third down conversion machine, and I think he could play well alongside Cole Kmet because he's a very good run blocker. But if the Bears decide to move on from Cole Kmet, that's a potential cap casualty because they could save $7 million by cutting him after June 1st. So that's another option. Number three is probably a hot take, but hear me out here. I've got Ashton Genty, and I put in parentheses trade down. The reason I put Ashton Genty, running back out of Boise State, is because I think the Bears did not get the most out of this running game last year. A lot was made around, the offensive line not doing as good as it could have done. And certainly that was the case at certain points in the season. But I also think DeAndre Swift isn't best utilized as a workhorse back at this point in his career. I think he's best utilized as a pass-catching, change of pace back for certain situations. So you put Ashton Genty in there, you immediately raise the ceiling of this running game regardless of who's on the offensive line. And I think that's an option that's a luxury that the Bears simply have not had in quite a while.
I like it, man. You talk about the Bears. They've been trying to rebuild their offensive line for years now. And that's the thing about Kelvin Banks is I've heard a lot of draft pundits talk about the concerns with his arm length and his overall frame. I think he's a guy that could definitely start his NFL career at guard, has the skill set to do so, and then kick out to tackle maybe later on. He gives you some of that versatility. I like that for Chicago. Just really solid player at the University of Texas. He is the reigning, what's the award for best lineman? Gosh, why am I blanking on it?
Joe Moore?
No, that's the team
not
award.
Right. Yeah.
But anyway, he won the award for best lineman just like T'Vondre Sweat did last year, back-to-back at the University of Texas. Love that pick. And then Warren, man, I mean, this guy is a Swiss Army knife playmaker who dominates the catch point, can get you conversions on third down with his surefire hands, and he will help, definitely, in the run game with his rugged, well-built frame. He's a former high school quarterback, actually. He's kind of a do-it-all utility man. Line him up anywhere. With Caleb Williams in this offense, along with all their other receiver talent, I really like that. 6'6", 260 is what I see him listed at here. If you move like he does at 260, 265, if he goes to the combine next week and runs like a 4.6, sub 4.6, he's definitely, I think, going top 15 with his skill set. And then Genty, he's if you really sold on, he's good enough. I think his talent is good enough to warrant a pick like that if you really want kind of that do-it-all back. So I like all three of those. I think any of those would be very strong picks for Chicago. For me, on the Panthers side of things, I think there are a couple options here, a couple avenues that they could explore. Number one, I want an edge rusher. Need to really help out this defense. I think they should go defense before they go offense. That's just my opinion. So I went with Jalen Walker. I'm in love with Jalen Walker, and I think if he's there at 8, the Panthers should consider him. He's a versatile difference maker. He can play off-ball linebacker. He can also play up on the line of scrimmage. He's, I think, just turned 21 years old, so he's pretty young for his draft class. 6'2", 245, 6.5 sacks last year. Disruptive, intensifying, raising defender. With his pass rush talent and explosive closing speed, that's something that Panthers could really use on this defense. And his versatility is what I really like about him. He could be considered kind of a tweener. His height is below average for a full-time pass rusher, and at times he struggles when playing off the ball. But a talent like him, I would very much consider for the Panthers. Number 2 on my big board, and I think this is probably the range in which he'll end up going, is Will Johnson, the corner out of Michigan. They need a corner opposite J.C. Horn. We know the injury issues in this Panthers secondary. He's a playmaking defender with size, instincts, ball skills to develop into a shutdown corner at the NFL level. 2 INTs last year, 3 pass breakups, been productive at the college level. I think he's got ideal speed and length, playmaking instincts. They need another corner. But he is coming off multiple injuries that robbed him of all but 6 games last year. So I think as long as his medicals work out fine, he'll be good to go in this range. And then if you want to give Bryce Young another weapon and you want to go the offensive route, I have Tet McMillan as my number 1 receiver, number 3 on my big board. I would go defense first, but if you wanted to go Tet McMillan here, I wouldn't argue with you. Just a super productive pass catcher at Arizona. Fluid athleticism, tremendous catch radius, big frame, can make the tough catches in traffic, would really be a good help to Bryce Young. Averaged almost 16 yards per reception last year, 8 touchdowns, really productive. Smooth footwork for a guy his size. And he's a 3-level playmaker that could really help out Bryce Young. So those are my top 3. Do you have any thoughts on those guys for the Panthers?
Yeah, I think Jalen Walker fit is a no-brainer. You look at their defense last year, and they simply did not have anything in terms of a pass rush. The secondary can do all you want, but if you have no pass rush, you're going to put yourself in a tough spot no matter who you're playing. You put any quarterback sitting there in the pocket for more than 3 seconds, and they're going to pick you apart if you're playing the NFL. So any type of pass rush help was definitely warranted. I love that pick. But yeah, I think all 3 fit really well for that team. I think what Dave Canales is building there, I think they definitely need a bit more physicality right now. That's definitely that type of player that they need.
Yeah, a couple other names I considered that if you expanded upon this big board, probably be on the big board. James Pierce Jr. out of Tennessee, another edge rusher who's kind of more of a wiry, twitched up edge rusher. He's got a very elite first step, excellent closing burst, but he kind of lacks the bolt, so he might struggle in the run game initially. And I don't think you'd play him off ball. He's more of that pure go get it pass rusher. I like Jalen Walker a little more because of his versatility, but that's another guy I'm sure the Panthers will take a look at. And then other scenarios for me kind of involved trading down. I think you could get good value maybe if the board falls in a way where you can't get a Jalen Walker or Will Johnson or Tet McMillan. those guys are all gone, you could trade down and still get, a really good piece for your defense, such as like a Michael Williams or I don't know, Malachi Starks, the safety. I don't know that I'd pick a safety at 8, but you could trade down and maybe still get that guy, depending on how far you trade down. There are a lot of options for the Panthers, and I'm sure you also considered maybe some trade down scenarios for the Bears. Were there any teams that stood out to you that would, potentially be good partners for a trade down, or were there any guys you were looking at for the Bears that you would trade down, maybe to hope to get?
Yeah, well, I think if you look at how the draft is set up, if either one of those top 2 quarterbacks gets past 7 with the Raiders, and there's a chance the Raiders look to round 2 to address the quarterback position. If one of those two guys falls, either the Panthers or the Bears could get a massive haul from one of those quarterback needy teams up in the higher parts of the draft. Like, it's a good example of that. I guess maybe the Jets.
Yeah.
There's not as many as there's been in past years, if I'm being honest, but there definitely still is teams that would make that move.
Absolutely. Anything else you want to talk about draft-wise before we move on to gut check?
Well, I think Jahdae Barron would be a great fit for Carolina as well. I think maybe if they traded down, they could, get a little bit more value. But even drafting him at 8, I wouldn't be like super, I wouldn't say that's a reach at all.
Yeah, I mean, the value you get in Jahdae Barron is his versatility at the end of the day. He did a really good job coming back to Texas for one reason, to prove that he could play outside corner at an elite level after being primarily a nickel guy for the first 4 years of his college career. And he was a really good player at nickel. But the thing that you saw happen when he moved to outside corners, he became more of a playmaker, more of a difference maker out there. And now NFL teams look at him, and that's the difference between him being, I think, a potential first round pick guy and like a just day 3, not day 3, but like round 3, maybe early day 3 guy. He really upped his value there. I wouldn't love taking him at 8. I think there are other players on the board probably get more value out of. But if you traded down to like middle of the first round and you picked them, I wouldn't have a problem with that at all. I think that would be an absolute almost home run for them because they need help in the secondary. I mean, J.C. Horn has had problems staying on the field. I don't think they have another solidified number 2 corner opposite him right now. They need a lot of help on their defense. So I think the balance for the Panthers is just going to be striking, do we want to go offense in round 1? Do we want to go the receiver route in round 1 when we could potentially maybe address that in free agency? And then go defensive heavy in the draft? I mean, I think it'll ultimately all depend on what they decide to do in free agency with their cap space.
Right, exactly.
All right, well, if that's all we have for the big board segment, and we'll continue doing these over the next couple months. I don't know if we'll get to every team, but we're also going to start reacting to some mock drafts. And doing some stuff like that, which will hopefully be exciting as we get closer. We do have the Combine next week. So on next week's show, I'm sure we'll be talking a lot about the NFL Combine, NFL Scouting Combine. Who's rising, who's falling, based on what we've seen, and a lot of that stuff. So the draft process is heating up. But let's go ahead and get into our gut check questions for today. I'll start us off. Since we're talking about the draft, I'll just go ahead and ask you this question. I think this is a interesting conversation. Assuming an NFL team has 7 picks, which we basically assume they have 1 pick per round, what do you think defines a good, great, and elite draft class? How many starters or stars do you need to get out of a draft for it to be considered a good draft class, a great draft class, and an elite draft class, in your opinion?
Yeah, this is a fantastic question. I think this is one that's probably not even thought about enough when you think about the draft. But to me, a good draft for round one, it has to be at least a second contract type of player, someone who can play through to their second contract. Because obviously, there's like a lot of injury luck that plays a part in it, but if you get, a good 5-6 years out of a guy of good to great play, that's a good pick in the first round. Second, third, fourth round, if you get 2 starters out of that, I think that's fair. And then 5th, 6th, 7th round, that's where you get your depth. If you're, adding, pieces that can step in a pinch in their rookie year and fill in for a starter, that's a win. I think that's what I would say is a good draft. A great draft / elite draft, I kind of I'm just going to try to lump them into the same category here because it's going to be hard to differentiate. An elite draft to me is round 1 and 2, you get absolute studs. Like it has just straight up round 1
Pro Bowl,
yeah.
All Pro level players,
perennial All Pro, perennial Pro Bowl, borderline Hall of Famer level players. And then round 3, 4, 5, probably if you get a couple of starters in there, I think that's, if you're getting 2 studs at top 5 players at their position, and then 3 more starters after that, that's an elite draft to me.
I view it very similarly. I think a good draft in today's NFL with 7 picks, 1 per round. For it to be considered a good draft, I think you have to hit on your first round pick. And that guy doesn't necessarily, in my opinion, have to become a Pro Bowl, All Pro level player for it to be a good draft. If you can get a starter out of the first round and then maybe another solid starter, a second contract guy potentially out of the second or third rounds, if you can get 2 of those guys in one single draft with 7 draft picks, I think that's a pretty solid draft. A great draft, though, where I think where those teams separate themselves, that's when you get 4 or 5 starters, 2 of which are difference makers.
Yeah.
Think about it in this way. If I were to put this in college recruiting terms for the Texas Longhorns, a great recruiting class, and it's different than the NFL, but say a recruiting class was, I don't know, 7 high school prospects. If I can get a Colin Simmons and, I don't know, think about last year's recruiting class. Let's say 2023. If I get Arch Manning and
Anthony Hill.
If I can get those guys along with a couple other starters, that's a really solid elite NFL draft class. If you can get 2 of those 5-star guys that become Pro Bowl, All Pro level players, and then 2 or 3 other starters, I think we're right on the same page there. I look at what the Lions did last year as in that territory.
Yeah.
It's those teams that really open up their contending window pretty wide because not only are you getting these guys and you're filling holes in your roster effectively through the draft, you're not paying them shit for 4 years. And did you see the news that the salary cap's going up by like $20 million this year?
Yeah.
And so that
It's
helps
crazy.
too. So those are the teams that. How many like for an elite organization? How many elite draft classes are these teams having? Like, is it
Like within a decade?
Yeah.
Within a decade, you probably get 3 or 4, I
Okay.
would say. And then if I was just going to say real quick before we move on, like if I were to try to differentiate, I would probably say it would be based on value. Like if you were to trade down and still get stud players and get more draft picks, then that's where you enter elite territory to me.
That's a fun conversation. Let us know what you guys think in the
Definitely.
comments. All right, up for your first question. Let me have it.
All right. First question for you is, if you had to pick 3 locks for the 2026 NFL Hall of Fame class, 2 first ballot and 1 second year eligible ballot, who would be your selections?
So, the 2025 selections were somewhat controversial in that Eli Manning was a first time on the ballot and he did not get in. It was Jared Allen, Antonio Gates, and a couple others. Very condensed Hall of Fame class of 2025. This year, though, it's really interesting because there are a lot of first ballot Hall of Fame players, Hall of Fame candidates that we grew up watching. I mean, you think about Drew Brees, you think about Larry Fitzgerald, you think about Frank Gore, a ton of these guys, right? I mean, it's your Dallas Cowboy, Jason Witten, my Pittsburgh Steeler, Marquise Pouncey, these kind of guys that are on the ballot for the first time this year. And you have to wait 5 years after you retire to get on the ballot. That's just the rule, if you didn't already know. So my locks for first ballot Hall of Famers, Drew Brees is an easy one for me. It's pretty self-explanatory. He never won the league MVP award, but he was the Offensive Player of the Year twice in 2008 and 2011. He has a Super Bowl ring. He led the NFL in passing yards 7 times. He was a first-team All-Pro once. He was a second-team All-Pro 4 times. He was the MVP runner-up 4 times. He led the NFL in attempts 4 times, completion 6 times, completion percentage 6 times, passing touchdowns 4 times. And he just, it's much more common to throw for 5,000 yards in a 17-game season like they have now. But the feat was only achieved 12 times total in the 16-game format, which ended after 2020. Only 12 times a quarterback threw for over 5,000 yards in a 16-game regular season. Drew Brees accounted for 5 of those seasons. No one else had more than 2. Nobody else
That's
had more
incredible.
than 2 of those seasons. His statistical dominance puts him in alone, but he has the Super Bowl ring. He was a winner. And, he holds a ton of records. If you contextualize his dominance at his career rate of 23.8 passing touchdowns per season, it would take Matthew Stafford 9 more seasons to tie Drew Brees' career touchdown mark. Stafford would be 44 years old at that time. It's absolutely crazy, his lasting legacy, and it's not just his numbers. He brought a Super Bowl to a city that had not won a Super Bowl. And you can't tell the story of the NFL without Drew Brees, I don't believe. And his longevity was incredible. He's a lock for me, for sure. And then I think Larry Fitzgerald is a lock too. One of my favorite non-Pittsburgh Steelers players to watch growing up in like the late 2000s, early 2010s when I really started watching the NFL on a consistent basis. He went through his career with some subpar quarterback play, to say the least. But despite all those issues, he's a 2010s All-Decade team member. He topped 1,000 yards 9 times and 1,400 yards 4 times. He led the NFL in receptions and receiving touchdowns twice each. He only earned first-team All-Pro honors once and second-team All-Pro honors twice. But, you know, his peak and his longevity were elite. He checks both those boxes. And he's widely, I think, accepted as one of the top 10 to 12 receivers of all time. Just his consistency and his long career, 16 years in the NFL. Finished second in career receptions, over 1,400 career receptions, second in receiving yards, 17,492, and 6 in receiving touchdowns at 121. He was a key cog in the Arizona Cardinals playoff run in the 2008 playoffs. Had a game for the ages against the Packers, if you remember, back in the 2015 season. There are some other, I think, deserving wide receivers on the ballot. But if one is going to make it first ballot, I think it's probably going to be him. He's the guy I would personally select, but I think he's the guy that the committee is going to end up selecting as well if they're going to put a receiver in. And then I do want to get your thoughts on, and I'll give my thoughts on Marquise Pouncey. I do want to get your thoughts on Jason Witten and when you potentially see him getting into the Hall of Fame. Or if you see him getting into the Hall of Fame. But if I had to pick another guy, this might be a little bit controversial. And look, there are tons of other deserving candidates. Phillip Rivers, it's his first time on the ballot. I don't think he's getting in first ballot, but he could get in eventually. You have Marquise Pouncey, LaShawn McCoy is on the ballot. Frank Gore, who for a while was like top 5 in all-time rushing yards. He might still be, for that matter.
I think so.
Julian Edelman, first time on the ballot. And then you have returning players on the ballot who, a lot of these guys, very deserving. Marshawn Lynch, Eli Manning, Sean Alexander, Tiki Barber, Jamal Charles, Reggie Wayne, Hines Ward, Brandon Marshall. You get the point. You can go look at the list on Twitter.
Reggie Wayne wasn't first ballot? That's interesting.
But my guy that I would select for a returning guy would probably be Luke Kuechly, the linebacker for the Carolina Panthers. The one knock on Luke Kuechly is his career was cut short, right, by some head injuries and other things, other health issues. So he doesn't necessarily check the longevity box. But in the time that he played in the NFL, he was about as good as you could get at his position. In his 8 seasons, he was selected to an All-Pro team in 7 of them. It's just incredible how good he was. And I think he has a very similar career to another guy that recently got in the Hall of Fame a couple of years ago, Patrick Willis.
Yep.
Who had a great career.
I was just thinking that.
With the San Francisco 49ers. Only played like 8 or 9 years in the league, but was one of the best at his position in that time. And if you're going to have a shortened career, you got to be elite. The elite of the elite at your position. He's a guy I would probably opt to put in second time around the ballot. But I mean, you could go with Frank Gore. We don't talk about kickers much, but Adam Vinatieri is on the ballot. I think he's probably going to get in at some point. One of the best kickers of our generation. It's an interesting conversation. We could do a whole podcast on who deserves to get into the Hall of Fame and who doesn't. But those would be my three. I think Breeze and Fitzgerald are obvious. And then you could go Luke Kuechly, you could go Frank Gore, you could go, Eli Manning if you think he deserves to get in at this point. Julian Edelman. I mean, there are tons. But your thoughts on that? And then also really fast, Jason Witten. Do you think he'll get into the Hall of Fame sometime soon?
I'll just Witten first. I think he will eventually get in. I don't think he will first or second ballot. I think it'll be more of like a third, fourth, fifth type of deal. The way I see it, I don't think he was ever considered the best player at his position, so that makes it a little bit tougher. But the longevity factor was a real thing, for sure. And that Y option route that he would run, it was essentially unstoppable on third down. And pretty much, ever since he retired, the Cowboys have been looking for a tight end. So that tells you a lot. But I mean, in all honesty, in terms of like flashiness, he's not gonna give you that. So I don't know if like that will kind of be held against him. I think it might be. But to address the other guys, Drew Brees, super easy. Not going to say much on that other than if it wasn't for Tom Brady being a cyborg, he would be the all-time leader in passing yards up till now. So there's that. And then Larry Fitzgerald, playoff Larry Fitzgerald was a real thing. Like I don't know if people really remember it, but from what I remember, every single playoff game that man was in, he was an absolute menace to guard. Particularly in that Super Bowl, it was nuts how good he played. In the game he played against the Steelers, obviously in a losing effort, but still, just, I mean,
he had the go-ahead touchdown
against
one of the best defenses of the 2000s. That 2008 Steelers defense was one of the best we had seen up until that point, and probably still is like in the top 5 of like the last 25 years. And I mean, golly, once he took off, he was gone. He beat Troy Polamalu, and he was, I mean, the reason I think the Cardinals were staying in that football game. But yeah.
And if you were to pick a guy in the modern NFL that would get the Super Bowl MVP in a losing effort, he would probably be the first one that comes to mind, in my opinion.
Yeah, and then I think the one more fans will remember, although I think that, I mean, that 2009 Cardinals-Steelers Super Bowl is one of the best ever, I believe.
Yeah, hands down.
But the one a lot of younger football fans will remember probably will be the divisional game against the Packers in 2015? That was insane. That was on another level. That game right there. I mean, you put everything that Larry Fitzgerald was into one game. That game exhibited why he deserves to get in. That was absolutely insane. And that game,
and he wasn't even in his prime at that point. He was like 32.
Yeah, that was ridiculous.
Insane.
So, all right, well, we can move on. That's a fun discussion as always. We'll do more historical football questions here in the next couple months when there's not as much other stuff to talk about for sure. But I'll move on to my next question for you. This is Texas related, and it is kind of draft related because this guy was drafted last year. In your opinion, what went wrong with A.D. Mitchell during his rookie year? And what are the biggest keys, do you think, for A.D. to have a bounce-back sophomore campaign?
Well, I think there's a couple factors to this. One, I think the emergence of Alec Pierce played a big part in this. A.D. Mitchell was set to be kind of their deep target, and Alec Pierce just straight up took that job, and respect to him. But also, I think A.D. Mitchell didn't have the feel in zone coverage in particular to sit down in open space and help out his quarterback and give his quarterback a target. And that's the other part of this also is I think that he has a way to go in terms of just feel and just consistency in terms of effort. I went back and watched some of his tape from this past season, from his rookie year, and there were certain points where you would look at it and it looked like he was kind of, cruising along, like he wasn't running full speed. And I actually read up on it a little bit. He actually, I think he has diabetes or something like that, so that could play a part in it as well. But it is a little bit of just he's got to get into the trust tree of one Anthony Richardson and of course Shane Steichen as well.
He's got some learning to do for sure. I'm not plugged into the Indianapolis Colts, but I do know that they talk about this stuff in the Longhorn community.
Yeah.
And he did have, I think, some icky moments, maybe some run-ins with the media at points in times. Like I think the game, forget who it was against, but when they ran that throwback play where he threw it back to, I forget who it was, but it was returned for a pick six. I forget which game that was.
It might have been the Houston game, I think.
Yeah, that game.
I want to say, yeah.
Where they ran that play, the little throwback, where they threw the screen to him and they threw it back, but it got picked off. No, it was against Denver. It was Indianapolis against Denver. Nick Benito jumped in front of that pass and took it the other way for 6. It was in a blowout losing effort, and they asked him some questions post-game. I don't remember exactly what they were, but the Indianapolis Colts fans and NFL fans in general really didn't like, his attitude. So I think he's got maybe some cleaning up to do off the field as well as I guess on the field. Do you think potentially the Colts aren't the best fit for him, or do you think he does have the potential to work out in this offense led by Shane Steichen and Anthony Richardson as of right now?
Well, I think there's no question that the chemistry between Anthony Richardson and A.D. Mitchell leaves a lot to be desired.
Yeah.
And so from that standpoint, yes, the fit isn't great right now. But with a full offseason to kind of sort things out, you would hope that they'll come back next year ready to rock and roll. And, of course, Anthony Richardson has accuracy things he needs to address as well. I remember early on in the season, there was 3 or 4 plays where A.D. Mitchell was getting open, getting behind the defense, and Anthony Richardson just missed him. So there's just, on a simple level, just execution from a team standpoint, not just him.
I would agree. All right, on to our next question. You're up.
All right, next one for you. This one is going to be Texas-related as well. Tashard Choice has left and gone to the NFL.
Yep.
And by the way, this is actually going to be the first of a new segment that we're starting on 2026 Texas football recruiting.
Yep.
We're making it officially a segment on each and every gut check show that we do. So that's an announcement. But the question, with Tashard Choice's departure to the NFL, how much will it affect 2026 running back recruiting? What's the best case scenario for Texas 2026 running back class? And Tashard Choice was the running backs coach for Texas. if you didn't already know.
Yes, he was the running backs coach for the duration of Sark's tenure so far. Actually, take that back. He was not the duration. It was Stan Drayton. Then they moved on from Stan Drayton. They hired Tashard Choice from Georgia Tech. I believe it was 2022. So Tashard Choice was with the Longhorns for 3 of the 4 years Sark has been here. And we all know what he did with this running back room. He gets to take credit for inheriting Roshan Johnson and Bijan Robinson, turning those guys into monster NFL players, developing them. Although he didn't recruit those guys, he made those guys into what they are now. The Texas run game was fantastic at that point. He took Jonathan Brooks from just a guy that Tom Herman recruited to being, I think Jonathan Brooks, if he had stayed healthy last year at Texas, would have won the Doak Walker Award for the best running back in college football. But he tears his ACL in that TCU game, and that was that, unfortunately. And now he's dealing with more injuries at the NFL level. But that, I think, was some of his best work at Texas. And then, what he's done with this current running back room. I cite Trey Wisner as the guy from this past year that really impressed me. Although the Texas running game at times really wasn't that great, you don't put that all on Tashard Choice. The one thing I would say about Tashard Choice, although this isn't a Tashard Choice question, it kind of is while I think that he's a fantastic recruiter, and I don't know that we really got to see the full rewards of that in his 3 years at Texas.
Yeah.
CJ Baxter was really his one elite prospect that he was able to coop. This past year's running back class was solid, but it wasn't anything special, in my opinion. Ricky Stewart and James Simon are good backs, but I don't know that they're going to be, making an impact at Texas next year or maybe even the year after. I think they're probably going to get kind of recruited over, to be honest with you, in this running back cycle, 2026, because the running back cycle in Texas is fan-fucking-tastic. It just is.
Yeah.
That's why I wanted to talk about it. Texas actually hired as of tonight, they have a new running backs coach. I'm not going to talk about that now, but we will get into that on Dit Hole later on. I don't think it's going to affect running back recruiting too much. I don't think it's going to have a devastating effect on the running back recruiting for 2026. What I will say, though, is Tashard Choice, one of his strengths as a recruiter was his ability to build relationships and his flair as a recruiter and a personality, just a personality in general. The kids in his room love him. That goes back to Georgia Tech with Jahmyr Gibbs, right? I mean, and extended to Texas. I mean, Bijan Robinson. Everybody loves Tashard Choice. And his value as a recruiter wasn't just in the running back room. He was a guy that Sark would send out on assignments, to recruit other big-time players at other positions just because of his personality and his flair as a person. Just people gravitate towards him. Now, congratulations to him. He's going to he's got a great job now as a running backs coach for the Detroit Lions. I mean, shit. I don't know if there's a better running back coaching job in the country, college or pro. To get to coach a guy you coached in college, you recruited in Jahmyr Gibbs. Not only that, but you have your offensive line and the Detroit Lions infrastructure, and you know that coaching staff is going to be there. And I think Tashard Choice is going to come back to college at some point. I think he'll probably get some looks for head coaching jobs or even coordinator jobs at the college level at some point. I think he's making this move up to the NFL so that he can have it on his resume to then come back to college, because I think he really enjoys the recruiting and all of that stuff. I don't think this affects. I think Texas is still in play for their top two targets. Their top two targets are Javion Osborne, who's going to be a 5-star out of Forney, and KJ Edwards out of Carthage. And both those guys are still going to take official visits to Texas, although they love Tashard Choice. They still gravitate towards Sarkisian in this offense. They're both elite prospects. And I think if Texas can just get one of them, that would be a really good recruiting class. But if you can get both, it would be one of the best running back recruiting classes at Texas since I don't know when. So I don't know that it affects it that much. They were going after E.J. Crowell from out of state. He's maybe the best back in the country. Once the news about Tashard Choice came out, he canceled his official visit that he had scheduled for June. So that's probably the biggest fallout from the Tashard Choice leaving for the NFL. But to be honest with you, I was never set on that guy going to Texas anyways. I think Texas is set on the guys in state. And even if they don't get both Javion Osborne and KJ Edwards, which is the ideal scenario, I mean, those could be 2 5-stars. I think they will get one of them. And that's fantastic. And if you're Texas, you want to be recruiting at a level where you get an elite prospect at every position almost every year. And so I think running back is going to be a big focus this year, along with offensive line, obviously, which is probably the number one. And then I think defensive line continues to be a big priority, along with linebacker. I mean, building this team up the middle is going to be a key in this year's recruiting class. But it certainly hurts. I mean, Tashard Choice was one of the best coaches on this coaching staff, no doubt about it. But at the same time, like, Texas can go out and they can find another really good running backs coach that can recruit, has the connections that Choice has, in the state of Georgia, in the southeast area, in the state of Florida where they pulled C.J. Baxter, and a guy that can coach the position. I mean, those guys, while they might not have the flair that Tashard Choice has, I mean, you can find a bunch of other good running backs coaches. So I think for some Texas fans, there was a little bit of an overreaction to the effect that this was going to have on the coaching staff. I think people just love Tashard Choice, but I don't know. I think he did a really solid job at Texas. I'm not even denying that. But at the same time, like, you look at this running back room from this past year, and what the hell were people talking about basically the entire season? Like, what the hell is going on with Jaden Blue? Why does he keep fumbling? Like, why do these backs keep fumbling? There were some things that just made you kind of go, okay, well, this is going to hurt a little bit in the short term. You can go out and find another running backs coach, and you can still attain all the goals that you have in recruiting this year. So that's kind of where I stand on it. Do you have any thoughts on it?
Okay, sorry about the technical difficulties. Had some internet connection issues there. But what I was saying was, I agree with you on your last point on Tashard Choice's coaching. Just even beyond the fumbling, there was some, I think, shortcomings in terms of ball carrier vision that you could see, like, as a whole, as a running back room. I think Trey Wideouts was really the only one that could be trusted in terms of making the right cut in the backfield and just having the patience as a runner as well, and also just footwork as well. Jaden Blue was good in terms of one direction type of back. Once he got his speed going, he was gone. But Trey Wideouts could make the right cut and pick the right hole, which I think wasn't a thing we saw from all the backs in that room. Obviously, it was a tough situation, but I'd like to see that moving forward more.
All right, let's move on to our last questions of the night. I will ask you my final question. Who would be your top 3 rookie wide receivers from this past season, the 2024 NFL draft class?
Well, to me, number one has to be Malik Neighbors. You look at just the numbers he put up, but not even that. You look at the eye test too, the catches that he was able to make in the red zone on just any part of the field, and he's making explosive plays everywhere you look. So Malik Neighbors, one, he's going to be a stud for a long time.
Yep.
At 2, I'm going to have Brian Thomas Jr. Personally. I think he was if I'm not mistaken, I think he was the 3rd or the 4th wide receiver taken off the board last year. And I think there's an argument to put him at 1 even. He was dominant down in Jacksonville this year, and they didn't have a lot of team success, but he was the one bright spot for that team. At 3, that's probably where I would have Marvin Harrison Jr. He didn't have a bad rookie season by any means, but I think there was some disappointment in terms of the contested catches. He wasn't able to make those tough catches as well at the NFL level, and whether it was just adjusting or just the higher level of athleticism affecting him a little bit more. No matter the case, it definitely was a little bit disappointing from that aspect. But from every other aspect, he was very productive, and by all means, he's definitely going to be a number 1 target for a long time in this league. So those are my 3.
Yeah, I think I agree with you on the first 2. Definitely, Malik Neighbors is a no-brainer, and Brian Thomas Jr. as well. I mean, picked 23rd overall. I think you can make an argument that when all is said and done, he could end up being the undisputed number 1 receiver of this class. From just his route running skills to his natural playmaking ability, he put on a very impressive rookie season, averaging almost 16 yards per catch. Big play specialist, the speed, everything stands out to me with him. He had 12 catches of 20-plus yards and 4 catches of 40-plus yards. So you get the explosive plays. And he really became their number 1 option. And then Malik Neighbors is obvious. Did deal with some injuries, particularly that concussion that kept him out for quite some time. But he's got what I call gold jacket caliber talent. He's got NFL Hall of Fame written all over him if he can just stay consistent and play for the amount of time that, if he has a good 10 to 12, 15-year career, you could see him putting on a gold jacket someday. His electric skill set, the ability to snag passes all over the field speaks for itself. He led rookie wideouts in catches with 80. He was second in receiving yards. And with, at points in times, their inefficient passing game, I mean, that's really impressive. Marvin Harrison Jr. is an interesting case, and I don't necessarily disagree with you. He was considered a generational talent out of Ohio State. Only topped the 100-yard mark twice. Had a couple of really good games. Wasn't in the best situation. If I was just looking at production, though, this year, I'd probably lean towards Ladd McConkey over him.
Yeah.
If we were just going to do rookie pass catchers, obviously Brock Bowers takes the cake, right?
Yeah.
With his production. But if it's just wide receivers, I might consider Ladd McConkey my number 3, and then Marvin Harrison Jr. my number 4. But at that point, you're kind of splitting hairs. So
Yeah.
I don't know, but it was overall. I mean, at the top, a pretty strong wide receiver class. I think you could say. I mean, Romo Dunze still, hasn't really tapped fully into what he could be at the NFL level. So, what we were talking about last year, I mean, I think we'll continue to talk about that rookie draft class. But those would be my top three personally.
Yeah, I think Lad McConkey probably does get the edge. You're right. I kind of forgot about him.
Yeah, he's easy to forget about for sure. Kind of
Ladidi McConkey. I don't know if you've seen that video, but
I've seen a lot of things the past couple of days on social media. But yeah, the NFL meme social media environment these days is pretty entertaining.
yeah, for sure. One guy I do want to shout out is Jalen Coker, also with the Panthers. Undrafted free agent, had a really productive season. He's got a bright future as well.
Yeah, I would agree. All right, let's finish them up with our last question of the night.
All right. Last question for you is a controversial conversation here to finish off. In your opinion, how should the NFL structure its replay system in an ideal world?
This is going to be a fun conversation.
Oh, yeah.
While I take a sip of coffee. I haven't been able to give this probably the amount of thought I want to, but what I will say is I think and you can jump in if you disagree, but I think the big issue with replay these days in football is the NFL and college football for that matter. In fact, it might be a little worse in college. But striking that balance between getting the calls right on the field, like you want to get the calls right, so you want to be able to review certain plays to make sure you have the correct call, which I think is good. And the NFL has done a good job making adjustments to the replay system over the year to where you can, challenge more plays and you can review certain things. But the replays, in my opinion, just take way too long these days in the NFL. There are too many super long reviews that disrupt game flow. Lots of commercials, when they're going to review. It's hard. If I was the commissioner, if I was Roger Goodell, I personally believe that anything that, it's kind of hard to explain, but any play, mostly any play should be reviewable. I think each team should get, in my ideal world, you get you can challenge anything once a half. So you have one challenge per half. You can challenge anything you want to per half. And then I don't really love the idea. I don't know what you think of the whole, like, you lose a timeout if you lose a challenge thing. I haven't always loved that. Yeah. But I don't know. My thoughts clearly aren't fully developed on the replay system. I just think shit takes way too long these days. And I don't know if there's a way if there's a way that I don't have necessarily a solution to speed things up. But do you have thoughts on the whole deal?
Yeah, I think soccer does it really well with how they do it. And they can't, obviously football can't do it the way soccer does, because soccer, they can, have the VAR going while the game continues. You can't do that in football. But for me, I agree with you on things being reviewable. The replay assist thing that they added this year, lean into that. And also just there needs to be more transparency on why the things are being called that are called. I think the XFL had a thing where you could, whoever is doing the replay assisting in New York, you had a camera on them and you got to see their thought process on what rule they're considering and all of that. Like, I think that is the thing that's frustrating, and that's what kind of plays into the whole conspiracy theory culture around the NFL is the fact that they hide so much stuff. The other thing, get rid of the chains, please. That shit fucking sucks. Like, it's 2025 and we're using chains. Like, tennis has fucking laser replay and can see the exact point the ball hits the ground. And in football, we can't do some type of laser sensing at all. Like, come on. Like what are we doing? It's a $1 billion industry. What are we doing?
Yeah, I think for me, more so than any replay system that they could come up with, the thing that bothers me the most is the thing you were talking about. Transparency. I wish that the referees would, and I get it, it's a very tough job to do. And it's one of the more scrutinized jobs in sports, being an NFL referee, especially at the highest level. The referees that are doing these playoff games, I mean, the vitriol from these fan bases on some of these calls on social media is absolutely, in my opinion, sometimes over the top.
Yeah.
And just in flat out insanity. But I think it could be a little better if the media got, I don't know, 5 or 10 minutes after a game with the head official or whoever it might be to ask them questions about calls that they made and why they made those calls, just to give them a chance to explain the reasons that they made the calls that they did, if there were any controversial calls in said game. I've heard it brought up by Josh Pate and others, like, we need some more transparency in officiating in football at both the college level and the NFL level. And I think I would make the argument it was worse at the college level than it was at the NFL level.
Yeah.
But just like, I don't know if you even have to do it after every game. I would just want more transparency with the current officiating and why certain calls are made. If a replay takes 10 minutes, so be it. I mean, it's not going to stop me from watching football. I don't think it's going to stop any of you from watching football. It hasn't. The ratings clearly show it. I think more people are watching football. They don't give a shit about how long the reviews take. I think most people would rather the calls be right than be wrong, and have a chance to go look at them, even if some of the technology, as you mentioned, is outdated when it technically shouldn't be. But for me, the transparency is the biggest thing. Like, let me hear the explanations from the referees. They don't ever get a chance to explain themselves or defend themselves for why they're making these calls. And so that would be my thing. Is like, I don't know if it would ever work out that way, because I don't know how, like, referees are employed or what their contracts state with the NFL. But I mean, I would look into something like that.
Yeah, I mean, the NBA does the final 2-minute report every game, I think, and then even could go beyond that. Like, why does it have to be the final 2 minutes? Like, why can't we just have a quarter by quarter penalty report, right? Like,
or even if it's just a report, like a written report on what calls were made and why they were made. I think that would work wonders for at least calming some of the fan outrage and conspiracy that goes on nowadays.
Yeah, and the information is out there if you want to look at it. Like, that way you don't have any room to create all these crazy theories about officiating and betting and all this stuff.
Yeah. Because that's a great point, because I didn't necessarily think about it originally, but I think the explosion of sports betting has put even more of a spotlight on the calls that are made and calls that aren't made, because some of these calls can actually, while we hate it as football fans, they can actually, like, at least, if not outright determine the outcome of games, they can swing games one way or the other a little bit. And that's where I think a lot of the outrage. I mean, fans have a ton of money on these playoff games. And a pass interference call here or there can make the difference in a team kicking a field goal to win and someone losing money and not losing money, maybe winning money. Like, it's those kind of things that I think expedite the amount of outrage that fans have towards officiating. But I think even like not a 2 minute report, but just a quarter by quarter, like quick explanation on the calls that were made throughout the course of a game, even if some fans would just totally ignore it, like some transparency would be nice. That's the overall arching point here.
Yeah, exactly.
We'll continue that conversation along with other conversations as we move throughout the time where football games aren't being played, but we don't have a off season here at the Raw Prospect Podcast. We'll continue with the big board segments. As Emmy mentioned, there will be one little mini recruiting segment in Gut Check every week. I don't know if it'll be every week, but most weeks we will have a little recruiting question during Gut Check. We're also, most weeks leading up to the draft, going to have a question related to NFL draft Texas prospects. Maybe ones that were drafted last year or ones that are going to be drafted this year. That'll be a little mini segment as well. And then we have some good stuff on the recruiting front coming in the near future. We're going to have some short clips on our social media with the latest recruiting news every week. We're going to figure something out. But look for more content. If you're into the recruiting stuff, look for more content in the coming weeks on our social media feeds. And then we will have some supplemental content, as we mentioned. If you want more Longhorn content, well, you're going to get it here very soon. We're going to have a episode of Deep in the Heart of Longhorn Sports coming out not too long after this episode comes out. We're also going to have a baseball episode closer to baseball season. And so look out for that. And then once the NBA playoffs roll around here pretty soon, in a couple months, we'll probably have something along the lines of NBA sooner rather than later. So if you still like all that stuff and you miss that stuff, you're going to get some of it, but we're mainly a football channel now. So give us feedback. We'd love to hear from you guys. Maybe once we can up our following a little bit, we can do some mailbag episodes where you guys give us the gut check questions and we just answer them on the show. I see a lot of my favorite podcasts do that nowadays. Jason Timpf with Hoops Tonight does it. Nerd Sesh does it. I mean, a lot of my favorite podcasts do it. So, any thoughts on the future of the podcast or any parting shots before we head out of here tonight?
Well, the main thing is just to expect lots of, I guess, philosophical football questions moving forward, because it's not off season, but we do have a lot of time to spend on just thinking about little things like the NFL replay system and stuff like that, and the rules and how the game can become better and all that kind of stuff. So expect more.
Yeah, and next week expect some questions on this Yahoo report from over the weekend.
Yeah.
On the college football playoff and stuff like that. That will certainly be a topic over the next couple weeks.
Oh,
as the
boy.
as the Big Ten and the SEC are trying to basically take over the sport of college football, which I don't honestly have a problem with, but teams and fans not of the SEC or Big Ten will have a problem with it. But we'll talk about that. So just be on the lookout. My one parting shot would be, I think there was I think there was a lot of fake outrage over the whole NBA All-Star game, All-Star break thing. Um, I don't want to drag this out even longer. We'd probably do an entire 30 minutes on it.
Yeah, honestly.
But my whole thing is just like I think there's a lot of nostalgia about what the NBA All-Star game used to be and what NBA All-Star weekend used to be. I think fans just need to accept like it's not going to there's not I don't think there's a solution to the game itself. I think we if it were me, I would just play a game, you know, whether it's US against the world, which I think is a great idea, or USA against Europe, or whatever we have to do, USA against international, something like that. I would just play a regular basketball game. Although I didn't hate the tournament format, I would just have less. The NBA needs to make it more about the basketball. I'm here to watch the basketball. I'm not here to, you know,
Learn about
watch all the ads and
formatting and all
commercials
that.
and
Like,
stuff.
yeah.
Yeah. I would just go back to the game. I think the dunk contest and 3-point contest are honestly fine. As long as Matt McClung is in the dunk contest, it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
I thought Steph Castle was really good. I think the 3-point contest is always pretty good. I think NBA All-Star Weekend in general is fine. I think there's a lot of fake outrage. I think fans just need to stop hoping it's going to be something that it's not. It's just not what it used to be anymore.
Yeah, and honestly, when I go back and look at watch these past All-Star games, like the nostalgia is like goes beyond what it actually even was. Like, of course, you had the 2001 All-Star game where like that was like a one in a 40-year thing. Like that, like of course, like that's a all-timer. Like,
Yeah.
no question. But like you can't use that as the example, and it's just not realistic at all. Like most All-Star games are just, you know, it's gonna be a dunkathon, essentially, which honestly is pretty entertaining, like alley oops and shit. I mean, I'm cool with it. Like, yeah, like I'm gonna watch
My
it.
whole
Fuck
thing
it.
is like the ideal scenario, in my opinion, is if you can get a regular basketball game, whether it's East versus West or USA versus International, with these All Stars, and you might have to take a couple US and put them on the international. I don't know if there's enough international All Stars every year, but you get the point. If you can just get one quarter of relatively competitive basketball in the All-Star game, that would be fucking fantastic. I think it would do wonders. If you could just ask these players. You don't have to play hard the entire game. You don't even have to try for 3/4 of the game. But if you can try to keep it close until like the fourth quarter and then do what we saw a couple years ago, I think it was like in 2020, where it was like 157 to 155 and there was actually like a competitive environment to it. That would probably be the most ideal situation. Like if you can just get even half a quarter of relatively competitive basketball where these players are giving more effort, that's probably the best you're going to get at this point. Because I don't think you're going to get to a place where the players are going to agree to go all out for this kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it's a showcase of the best talent in the world. So
Yeah.
it's really not even supposed to be like a NBA playoff game. That's not what it is.
Of course not. And I have an idea. I want to say real fast. Darn it, we're doing the thing again.
Well,
This is going to go on for 30 minutes. Fuck it, let's go. Anyways, I have an idea that will absolutely never happen, but I still want to put it out there into the universe. I would love to see them go to like a 3v3 type tournament type of thing, because I think the reason why no one wants to try on defense is because of it's just the density of bodies on the floor makes it dangerous. Like,
Yeah.
if you're going into the lane, you're not going to, rotate and cause a collision like in the All-Star game because that's when the bad shit happens. But like in a 3v3 game, say half court, there's a lot more space on the floor and it'll be a lot more like just like I don't know, be a lot easier to just I don't know, just play basketball. Like this is going to sound stupid, but like I've played a lot of 3v3 basketball games and I don't think I've ever seen anyone get injured, but I mean that's kind of these are the best athletes in the world, and that's different. Like they're jumping 40 feet in the air or whatever, but
I've always and this is the last thing. I've always wondered what a one-on-one contest would look like.
I feel like everybody has, yeah.
Yeah, but I don't know if we're ever gonna get that. All right, guys. Well, that was just a parting shot thought for this week since it was relevant to what happened over the weekend. But that's going to do it for this episode of the Raw CrossFit Podcast. Thank you guys for tuning in. Make sure you like and subscribe. Go listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. And check out our Patreon. It is free of charge. For Emmy Nixon, at Emmy_Nixon on X. And for myself, Michael Ween, at Michael_Ween1 on X. This has been another edition of the Raw CrossFit Podcast. Have a great week. Enjoy the basketball and baseball coming soon, I guess, and the NFL scouting combine, and we'll see you next week. Peace out.
Peace. Ew, you called it X.